Hi, I'm Tony Preston. This video is about a series of related posts to help you understand what's available to people on the site. There are posts related to people who are in pain. Those are the most popular posts by far. They talk about pain patterns and how to take care of those. There's also posts related to treating those patterns as a therapist and doing that through a body work technique like neuromuscular or through cranial work. And there are also posts about cases and body work concepts. Let's just kind of walk through the post and take a look at them and talk a little bit about each one. This series I've just put out on Patreon from June 17th until somewhere around the 4th of July. I've posted one each day so that you can find them all in a collection together if you're a Patreon subscriber. You can also go to the anatomy post for infraspinatus and see all of these posts listed out there. The most common posts that people come out here to find are posts on pain. By far, the majority of the traffic on the site are people looking to understand their pain. These posts have some information about how people describe that pain, what they come in and say to me, or what's typically reported according to research. Also, how those people either created that problem, intensified that problem, that sort of stuff. From that post and that information, it then links to the other post. This one actually has some assessment in it as well, where it goes through and says, here's some tests you can do that if you have pain, it's probably this muscle. The posts go further. They're connected to an anatomy post, a self-care post, and some therapist notes. Let's look at the anatomy post. The anatomy post is kind of the center of the universe on a particular muscle, and it has with it all the posts that are related. So let's look at that real quick. Anatomy posts start out by the simple answer that you see in most anatomy books about what is the origin, insertion, function, and innervation of a muscle. It then goes on a little bit further and says, here are some things that are interesting about the muscle for the body worker. Here are some details of the attachments. Here are some common anomalies we see. There's some structural stuff. For instance, this muscle here has some strange attachments on the shoulders. Some of the pieces attach on a common tendon. One of the bellies of this muscle attaches on the tendon of the teres minor muscle. This is one of those three bellied muscles like gluteus medius or trapezius. It has a tough covering on top of it, also like the gluteus medius does, and the temporalis muscle also has a tough covering like that. So it talks a little bit about that, and then it talks about the posts that are related. It says here are posts on everything from the anatomy, therapy notes, other pain patterns, neuromuscular routines, craniomuscular routines, self-care, all the way down to some body work concepts. Okay, so most people come to the site looking at this post on the pain pattern. Many of those people then go over to the SelfCare Post. The SelfCare Post has its own sections. It goes through very standardly and says, here's the post this came from. And so this particular muscle has three pain patterns that are notable. I link you back to those if you'd like to read more about the pain patterns as well. It has activities that you should avoid or change. Then it talks about temporary relief. If you want to use a pain patch, here's where you should apply it. Here's maybe a little something you can do to offer you some relief if you're sitting at your desk or you're traveling. You're not in a place where you can really rehabilitate the muscle. Then goes on to say, here are some stretches and exercises for longer lasting relief. Often in this section, there are exercises laid out just specifically for this post. In this particular post, This shoulder pain routine for stretching and running with a tennis ball is used in more than one for more than one muscle, and so it has its own post where it goes through that exercise in more detail, kind of telling you all of the information about how you might do that. After the stretches and exercise section, I then go through a yoga corner. Um, the yoga corner talks about either yoga poses that are aggravated by this problem or yoga poses that help this problem or some concerns that you would have if you're a yoga practitioner in relationship to this pain pattern. So I've talked about the pain pattern, the anatomy, and I've talked about the self-care post. I've also talked about an individual self-care post. As well, at this point, we begin to get into people who are subscribing on Patreon. There are therapy notes. Therapist notes are also set up pretty standardly. They have an intro section that says you should go look at the anatomy, be familiar with the anatomy before you go through this. Then on this particular muscle, it has some information about assessing these patterns and how you might differentiate this from some other problem that's similar. And then it goes into integrative treatment sequencing. In every massage notes section and every therapy notes section that I write, I start out by saying, listen, here are some cranial things you can do that help this muscle out. I use craniostructural work a good bit. I've taken that and adapted into something I call craniosacral, which is specifically about releasing trigger points by doing cranial work, biomechanical cranial work. After we've treated the cranial pieces, we then go through and treat the vertebra that are connected to that to open up the nerve roots, mobilize some local joints, and this one, the humeral head. And then there are routines from the workbook of classical neuromuscular therapy, which was used for 16, 18 years at the Asha School of Massage. I wrote that book back in the mid 90s, and I've just taken those routines and put them out here so that you could take a look at them if you're a neuromuscular therapist or you just like an idea of a routine. Those there are individual posts for those. Again, it says, here's the muscles that are treated. You should probably look at the anatomy first. And then it has very specific, detailed material that's intended to be learned in a class. That it talks about each little piece to friction, places to go through and treat trigger points individually, et cetera, et cetera. And then those routines have a summary with them that you can go through to once you learn the routine if you're just looking for a guide to take you through it. These posts are meant for the mindful review of therapists who already have an education in massage and are just looking to see how someone else might do this. Connected to the therapy notes is, of course, patient follow-up. This is put in here for the bodywork therapist, massage therapist who's looking to have a self-care post that they can give to their clients and say, here's something to follow up with to help you until the next time I see you. In this bodywork post, one of the things that I talked about was this whole idea of a craniomuscular release. So I've taken and created a post on that craniomuscular technique. Rotator cuff muscles they're kind of mapped out across the coronal suture, and so this talks about where to find those and how to find those, and as well has a link to the craniosacral or biomechanical cranial technique for releasing those sutures. So here's that release, and it has with it some illustrations as well as a video on how to do coronal suture release. So connected to the infraspinatus post, there are a couple of other things. One is this post, which is a case history. It talks about a client who came in that had a problem in his shoulder. I did regular neuromuscular work and joint work around the shoulder. It wasn't resolving itself. Um, I had worked with the guy for years. I went through and did the cranial work, the craniomuscular work, the craniostructural work that went through and released it. And it's an interesting story about how we had difficulty with it. And as soon as I did the craniomuscular work, his infraspinatus problem released, the trigger point palpably changed, his range of motion was better, he quit having pain in his golf. As well, connected to this uh, neuromuscular or this infraspinatus muscle, there's a post about trigger point assessment and how it pinpoints a problem. So this is part of the therapy concept section. It talks about how neuromuscular assessment really helps to pinpoint pain by connecting patterns and impaired function, so that once you kind of know that, it gives the therapist a good idea about where to start. There's often in body work, we say the person who starts at the point of pain is lost. That really you need to figure out what's generating that pain. And this post talks about how neuromuscular assessment helps you to target those pieces. As well, back in the craniostructural, craniomuscular section, there is a follow through that says you should follow this technique with functional organization. And so here's another bodywork concepts post that talks about functional and structural work and what the differences are and what's the difference between craniosacral and craniostructural, and talks about those concepts and how you might practically use them. These pieces they're made for therapists are available to people who have a Patreon subscription to us. And those Patreon subscriptions are available at different levels. The first level is the viewpoint level. It allows you to see some illustrations. I've been on the fence about whether or not to have a subscription to the anatomy post, because on one hand, the anatomy post has a tremendous amount of time involved in me creating illustrations. On the other hand, it really is the centerpiece that kind of helps you see what's available on that muscle. And so what I've done here is I've created a minimal subscription that allows you to see extra anatomy illustrations that I've done that aren't available to everyone else on the website. Beyond that, if you're a therapist and you're interested in doing trigger point work or some other sort of body work, you'd like to see the routines and the integrative sequencing that's out there, there's this able-bodied level of subscription, which allows you to see those therapy notes and that sort of stuff. Beyond that, there is a level called level-headed, which is about craniosacral and TMJ work. So all kinds of work on the head using basic biomechanical craniosacral and neuromuscular TMJ. By the way, if you want to learn the difference between biomechanical craniosacral, Pledger's craniosacral therapy, the biodynamic craniosacral or craniostructural work. If you want to learn about that, there's a post out there that kind of explains the difference. I particularly like biomechanical work and biodynamic work. For solving pain patterns, I've used craniostructural work, which is a form of biomechanical work, for many years. Beyond the level-headed subscription level, there is Sound, Mind, and Body, which makes all of those craniostructural or craniomuscular pieces available to you so that you can begin to see how to release trigger points and pain patterns from the cranium. There is also an expert level that if you particularly would like me to write something, if you'd like me to go ahead and write the section on adductor magnus, or you'd like more information about that out there, then I'll jump ahead out of my sequence and do that work. Currently, we're in the process of updating the posts that are out there. and adding posts as we're going along so that we're trying to fill this section out. It's one of the reasons we need support, is that it's a tremendous amount of work to get that done. And the ads on the site generate a little bit of money, but not much. And actually, we're looking at taking all of the ads off for any of the levels where people subscribe. I'm Tony Preston. I hope that was helpful and helps you understand the site and what's available out there and what's available to people who subscribe on Patreon. Thanks for your time.